All right. Good morning, Doug. Today, as we're wrapping up 2022, we want to go through the big trends that you think are defining what happens in 2023. You got some good ones here. There are 8, if I recall.
Yeah, there are. And there are probably more. We haven't listed them all, but where should we start? Well, perhaps I ought to mention them because what you're supposed to do, I understand, when you're giving a presentation is tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So let me run down in one sentence each the 8 things that are, they're like a concerted attack on the way things are. First was the COVID episode. That's the biggie that happened. Second is bringing carbon neutrality or carbon hysteria, global warming, and that type of thing up to the forefront. The third is the action on the part of central banks to impose digital currencies, CBDCs, on everybody. Fourth is the trillions of government spending on the part of all governments around the world, but first and foremost, the US government. Fifth, the widespread acceptance of wokeism as a new religion. It's a major thing underlying a lot of this, actually. Sixth is the trend towards digital IDs. Seventh is the security of apparatus of the state itself has turned against citizens as opposed to just foreign enemies. And eighth, and this is developing, the social credit system. And there may be other things, but you add those 8 things together, and they're separate, they're related, but they're separate. It looks pretty grim for the average guy out there.
Well, so these are major trends that are happening, but the first one you started with was relating to COVID. So I mean, some people think that COVID's over with. How does that trend continue forward? How do you see that working out?
Yeah, well, it's not over with because in government buildings, often local and county and state, and everybody is still wearing masks in medical facilities. They're wearing masks, even though the doctors and nurses realizes that it's just a stupid kabuki theater charade. So fear of the flu is still out there. You still see people wandering around wearing their masks. And of course, on the one hand, it annoys me to see such blatant stupidity. But on the other hand, it's like they're wearing armbands saying, I'm with her, as it were, or so. It's nice that they're kind of self-identifying too, but there will be a COVID 2.0. And the reason I predict that is, I hate to use the word predict. It sounds like you're a fortune teller if you predict things. I think it's more acceptable if you say, I forecast, or.
That is true. That's weird. Yeah, that is weird. Yeah, it is true.
It is. It's kind of the connotation of these words. It's forecast is more legitimate than predict.
Well, let's stick with forecast then.
Anyway, this is part of their capturing the language, which is part of one of these 8 things that we've mentioned, although I don't think I actually wrote that down. So what they're trying to do is vaccinate everybody. That's still ongoing. And it really is so stupid, because even though it's pretty clear that the virus, the COVID virus, was artificially created or modified, uh, it would seem that all viruses, just by their nature, they go viral, so it's almost impossible to hide from them. So this whole thing about distancing and mask wearing and and locking yourself in was stupid from a medical point of view, number one. And number two, viruses burn out. They reproduce and mutate rapidly, and it seems that they always mutate to become less aggressive and less dangerous. And
Killing your
so,
killing your host is bad. You die if you kill your
yeah,
host. Yeah.
exactly. But since all of these governments and the powers that be, uh, it seemed like they were acting in concert around the world to get everybody to do the same thing everywhere, almost everywhere. That that worked pretty well.
Yep.
So, and the average member, the average hoi polloi was very scared. So COVID 2.0, and of course, in the recent past, this is kind of suspicious. Viruses have always been there. The flu's always been there. Colds have always been there. But in the last decade or so, we've had Hong Kong flu and Asian flu and SARS and bird flu and swine flu. And these things, none of these things were even remotely in the same category as the Spanish flu that hit after World War I. But it seems like the public has kind of become accustomed to a new flu out there, and they know the next one could be really dangerous. So monkeypox, well, that didn't work. But there are memes in the wind about, well, maybe Ebola will strike, or maybe polio will come back again.
Mhm.
And it's really rather crazy that they want to get everybody vaxxed, because if you're vaxxed, they said you're safe. Well, it turns out, but who knows? Because it's only anecdotal evidence anywhere. I mean, you can't discuss these things. You can't do widespread testing or studies, because that's,
Well, especially if they might potentially produce a result that goes against the official narrative, can't have it.
Yeah, precisely. But the thing is that if you were vaxxed, presumably you are safe. So it should be an individual thing. Do I want to take the vax or don't? If I take the vax, I'm safe. I don't care if you don't want to be safe, but it's not the way it works. It's all upside down and perverse and bizarro world. But they found that health is a rationale that people will follow. They'll do what they're told if it's a danger affecting all of us. It's not like doing what you're told and locking down everything for political reasons or ideological reasons or economic reasons. People will resist that. But health, they pretty much roll over. So this is a great way to control the population. And I'm
So
sure
it's
they'll
going to
use
continue.
some form.
Well, another thing is that there was recently at the recent G20 summit, a part of the official agreement among the G20 parties when they left there was the deployment of a global passport, vaccine passport or health passport. So this thing's been talked about for a while, and it's clearly coming to fruition. The G20, it's in at the end of G20 documents. You can see it. So I think we talked about that in a prior episode. So even though COVID's easing off, the infrastructure that's been built is just too useful for them to abandon at this point. They have big plans for it. So I think you're right. This trend, I hope we don't get another disease in 2023, but certainly the trends, the infrastructure is going to continue to be built out, no doubt.
Yeah, without question, to be used at the appropriate time. But Okay, but you got to have a backup plan if you want to kind of rule all the plebs in the world. And I think the elite, uh, we really shouldn't even call them elite because they're actually parasites. They
Yes.
don't, they don't produce anything.
Right.
All they do is give orders.
Right. Right.
So
They would call themselves the elites, but as if they're the best of us. But no, they are apart from us. They are the parasite class. I think that's a great way to think of it.
yeah, it is. It's important to use words properly and call a spade, actually. So the big backup plan uh, is climate, which in some ways is very similar to the kind of hysteria you can build up with health. I mean, climate is something that can kill everybody, and you don't have to. So it works very well, and
Doug, it goes along with the long used instruments of abstraction. Wars against abstractions. The war against terror, another abstraction. You can't really see it or identify it, but it's everywhere at all times. So you must be on alert. Certainly, the
yeah,
disease characteristic.
yeah, especially a scientific type or concept that the average guy doesn't understand. The
Right.
average guy understands what he needs to get by in life, but he doesn't understand these things. I mean,
Well, yeah,
so
and they tell you that you need to be an expert to really understand it. So they tell you not even to bother trying. You need an expert, or you need this PCR test to even know if this is real or if you're sick. You can't rely on your own. Do I feel sick? You have to be tested to know.
yeah, and of course you need experts, which are credentialed by the state and the parasites and so forth. So anyway, climate has become a major hysteria too. And the concept has taken over a large majority of kids and the youth because they're brought up to believe in, Mother Earth and greenism and the climate and all this type of thing from kindergarten levels. And they're convinced that global warming will destroy the planet unless we go green, which means stop using fossil fuels and attempt to run an industrial civilization on windmills and sunshine. And like I've said many times, I got nothing against windmills and solar power. They're fine for particular locations, but they're not for running a global industrial civilization. In fact, this whole trend stands a chance of actually destroying civilization because it can work to break down supply chains and so forth. So that's the second big enemy. We're aware of those things. Those things are out there and are building.
One we had a video about this a couple of weeks ago where we talked about within this climate change concept, these new what they call 15-minute cities. And like they had this one example we talked about was they'd taken Oxford and they divided it, I believe, into 5 or 6 distinct pieces. And the idea was that your movement to and from those parts of it were limited, and you're limited a certain number of days of departing this 15-minute portion of your city by a certain allowance, and that every time above that you would be fined, and it'd all be gated access. This is all for climate.
That was for climate. Yeah, that was the ostensible reason for controlling people, and that ties into. Let me see which one of these things, because they're all related and it's all the same people that are in back of all 8 of these things. So they all tie together.
I think the great thing is this is the first example I've seen of those. I haven't been able to conceptualize how they will use climate. Like how will it manifest itself as an excuse to sort of lock down or manage the population better? And I know about like people having their own, keeping track of their own personal carbon footprint and stuff like that. But that still seems abstract, too abstract to me at the time. But when you see this 15-minute city agenda that's being actually rolled out, actually approved in cities around the world, it was a big wake-up call for me that this was a lot further along climate change hysteria, its implementation, than I imagined.
Yeah, it's a good test case. I mean, let's see how it works on a small scale and then roll it out. Yeah, absolutely correct. And well, all of this is going to be made much, much easier by the other thing, which is currently being rolled out. And these are central bank digital currencies. Money gives you personal power. Money gives you freedom to have things and go places, and do things. But if your money is all controlled by the powers that be, which is what CBDCs are all about, because all your money goes through them on your cell phone, they have complete control over what you can buy, and they know what you're receiving, and they can debit your account if you're naughty, and
And,
you know,
and including how much you can save. Is that was another thing. We saw a headline about this a couple of weeks ago. We discussed during an episode that they were discussing caps on the savings rate that people could have.
that's right. They want people to consume as opposed to save, really. But that's idiotic. Saving is a good thing. It's
Well, it's a good thing. It's a good thing for individual empowerment, but
Yeah.
it's not a good thing for to keep you on the plantation.
Yeah,
By
exactly.
freedom of that savings.
Yeah, exactly. Because the more junk that you have stored in your rental storage unit, the more tied that you are to wherever you are. It's kind of a subtle string to keep you where you are. Gee, I don't want to leave all my junk in the storage unit. I
Yeah.
better stay where I am.
Well, and even, and I guess the other thing is, if you can't buy more stuff or don't buy more stuff, that money would expire. The bottom line is they do not want you to accumulate savings, because that leads to your individual, autonomy. And that seems to be the direction they're trying to avoid at all costs.
Well, and it'll make it much, much easier for them to do things like the Canadian government did with the Canadian truckers, where they were basically seizing their bank accounts. So this will make it so much easier for them to do that type of thing if you're naughty.
Hmm.
So it's unprecedented, and there's very, very little discussion anywhere on it. And since the average guy doesn't know anything about economics and he doesn't care, and it'll be sold as a convenience because everybody likes to use their cell phone. I mean,
yeah. What about how the fact that we talked about this also maybe a month or so ago, about that in Nigeria, the rollout of the central bank digital currency had not been, the uptake had been very low by the population. And they were starting to institute more coercive measures like limiting ATM withdrawals to $45 a day. But you think that, it sounds like you think that, they run into some hiccups, but ultimately the central bank, this will succeed. Like this will end up happening there and everywhere.
yeah, I think it will. I mean, Nigeria, it's a huge country with 200 and some million people. But it's one of those places that, first of all, it shouldn't be a country. It's just an accident of geography and colonial conquest that it became a country. Nobody trusts the government. Nobody trusts the currency. It's
So that's a big advantage for them.
it is. They know better. But people in the West and advanced countries are used to trusting their government. The friendly cop on the corner and all this type of thing, who doesn't exist anymore, incidentally. But yeah, so maybe the future, in more ways than one, maybe a good aspect of the future lies with the backward third world. Maybe they're a lot harder to boss around, as the Nigerians have shown, than docile Europeans and Americans are.
Good point. Very good point.
Anyway, CBDC is really big, disastrous, monumental thing. And they're looming right on the horizon. Every government in the world is working on them at this point.
I suspect this is going to be a topic we come back to over and over again in 2023 episodes of our podcast. It's just so important.
Yes, as it's implemented in various ways, no question. It's a biggie, just like the first two are. But then there's a fourth thing, and that's the trillions of government spending, which have been rolled out, well, because of COVID, they said, and because there's weakness in the economy, because of, they blame this on the Russians too, partially, of course. uh, you know, but trillions of government spending. And I'm not sure most people even pay attention to this type of thing, but that money goes somewhere. And where does it go? It goes to favored classes and businesses. Uh, it Some of it is distributed to the lower classes, people that have no assets and are just getting by from day to day. That's the class that's growing, the lower classes. And most of it goes to the upper classes via banks and consulting firms and God knows what. That's where the big money goes. And the middle class is who pays for these trillions of government spending because they're the ones that pay the taxes and try to gather assets and have savings and so forth. So these trillions of dollars that are being spent everywhere, but mainly Europe and the Anglo-Saxon countries like the U.S. It's acting to direct more money and power to the so-called elite. That's where all that is going.
Well, in this, I want to mention something about this, but it ties to your number 7th point here, but I think it's worth talking about because there's this $1.7 trillion spending bill that was just passed. And as part of that $1.7 trillion, there was, I believe the number is $2.6 billion that was allocated for the prosecution of the January 6th, attackers, they call them, or the trespassers or whatever. But this is just for the attorneys that are involved in the prosecution of those people. $2.6 billion.
That's an incredible amount of money. It really is. And well, worse than that, talking about trillions of government spending, nobody's talked about the fact that 87,000 new IRS agents are designated to be hired with that money.
Right.
That is a lot of little bed bugs to run around. Well, are they going to monitor the lower class? No, the lower class doesn't have any money, and forget about that. And the upper class, they have lawyers and accountants, and they're pretty insulated. It's those 87,000 are going to devastate the middle class further.
Right. And I think the big thing here with this, I've always thought of spending the money before as just destroying the currency, selling the future of the country, stuff like that. But what's happening now with it in particular is we are essentially financing a system that will further oppression of most normal citizens. Right. I mean, that's really that's I think one of the major points that you take away from that. Yeah.
And as that money goes out there to the banking system and the standard of living goes down, it's going to, the average guy is going to be induced to borrow more to maintain a standard of living. But debt is a chain around you. Once you have debt, we've talked about savings and how they're trying to wipe out savings as something that you do. But debt is fine because it keeps you where you are and ties you to your job. And, nobody wants to be kicked out of their mortgaged house or their crappy little apartment and wind up sleeping on cardboard under a bridge.
Right.
And so you got to keep earning. You got to stay on the treadmill to pay that debt off. That's part of it.
Yep, I agree. It's a trap.
Yep. So number 5 is the widespread acceptance of wokeism as a new religion. And it actually is a religion, just because they don't believe in a traditional God of whatever type, Yahweh or Allah or whoever. But people need a religion. It's very much like in Russia and China and other countries. Marxism was actually a secular religion. It gave people something to believe in. And I'm not a religious person. I'm not a Christian, although of course I grew up as one. But the destruction of Christianity is part of their program because it gives people a moral compass. And we can argue about good or bent or straight or what, as far as a moral compass is concerned. But the moral compass of Christianity, in theory at least, is pretty good. And they're trying to destroy that and replace it with wokeism, which is an actual religion. And what is wokeism all about? It's about racial quotas, which is absolutely insane. It's making people think of themselves as members of a racial group as opposed to individuals. It's actually criminal to inculcate that meme into people. That's part of wokeism. And aggressive LGBT plus promotion. And as we've discussed before, no problem with people doing whatever they want to do with their bodies and among their friends. The problem with these things is that it's being actively promoted, and worse than just being promoted, because these are basically aberrations, is what they are. I mean, they're neuroses that are being dramatized on a large scale. But
it's being defined as a virtue of some kind, defined as love, essentially, and it's being tied to the power of the state. The first time I noticed that, I was walking in, was in Germany. Where was I? I was in Munich, and the U.S. Embassy there, had a flag flying. It was the American flag, and then below that was the gay pride flag. And I was like, I just found that shocking. I didn't understand actually that it was that it was so connected to political power, that it was being used in that way. I just actually thought it was just people who, were looking for rights of, gay and lesbian people. That's what I thought it was.
Yeah, this is not a legitimate function of government to, cram a view and the promotion of a class, just like a racial class. And here we're talking about a class of, it's fine. You don't force other people to accept it. And of course, that has to do with all this nonsense with pronouns, where people are being fired from their jobs if they don't use people's pronouns. It's enforced stupidity, where you're forced to do something that is stupid and aberrated, and the other people, but if you're forced to do it, I mean,
Doug, it's a religious right. It's a religious right. It's like it's something you do as a practice of the religion. That's so they have to get you to do these things that they don't have to make sense. But every time you do them, it kind of inculcates you deeper in the religion.
Yeah, it becomes accepted. It becomes part of the cultural and cosmic firmament if you do that. And of course, added to that are these concepts of ESG and DIE, diversity, inclusion, and what's the E stand for?
Equity.
Equity, which basically means giving them money. And ESG, which, it's boards of directors of public companies, or for that matter, private companies, have to have a Black, have to have a woman, have to have a gay, have to have this, have to have that. Nothing to do with producing more goods and services effectively and profitably. But this is everywhere. So it's
right. And I think the comparing this to a religion is so important, because if you imagine that, the Catholic Church had infiltrated every school, every private organization, every governmental office at all levels, as well as every major corporation, and started essentially listing a set of demands that they had for how that organization had to conduct itself to be in its to satisfy the Holy Trinity or whatever. Like, people would think of it as just unbelievably, awful, terrible. What is going on here? But for some reason, this has snuck in the same way, and no one noticed. And now it's here, and now the demands are on the table.
Well, it's being imposed upon society in much the way that the church in earlier times had the Inquisition, right, to find out if if you believed what you're supposed to believe. And if you didn't, you were punished. And that's exactly what this is. It's a modern version of the Inquisition. And it goes beyond that because it's going now to race reparation payments where somebody is going to give a lot of money to people that are of a certain skin color. How they're going to prove this, it's going to be just more corruption and stupidity.
Well, they might give them an excuse to collect DNA from everyone.
Well, absolutely, no question about that. And of course, DNA is the ultimate identifier. And as it becomes harder,
This sounds very Nazi party-like, by the way, to collect this genetic information on people to make sure people are in the proper role in society, rewarded properly. I mean, it really does.
It's amazing. They call the people that are interested in individualism and personal freedom, they call them Nazis, but they're the Nazis. And once again, it's the perversion of language, turning everything upside down so that, the whole country, the whole world is being, I guess the term is gaslighted, where, that doesn't exist. This exists over here, and you if you don't believe it, it's at your peril. Well, anyway, reparation payments, guaranteed annual income, that's all going to be part of the religion. If you want to do what's good, and it's part of the global warming scam and part of the COVID scam. It's religious. It's all religious. People need religion, but it's nice if the religion is benign and just helps. This is also perverted.
Well, you said something. You said because people want to do what's good, and this is true. This is the nature of people. They all want to do what's good, and so this process, whatever's been done to the culture, where it's basically removed any sort of rudder that anyone had about what was good, whether that be Christianity or whether it be more traditional values or even historical references, that we have about courage and whatever, an event, like all the role models all have been, with all the statues being taken down and things like that. It seems to me if they can erode enough of that good away, there's a blank canvas and they can impose a different set of goods, and then people will pursue them because people are looking for good.
It's a total and accelerating collapse of traditional moral values. And you can argue about, well, this traditional moral value is good or bad, but when you wipe all those things away, it's been said that people that believe in nothing will believe in anything.
Yes.
And that's what's going on. They're wiping away the old beliefs. So people believe in nothing. And now they'll believe in anything, any kind of absolute insane stupidity. Anyway, wokeism, this is a huge thing. Religion is a gigantic underlying factor, and they're working on changing the religious underpinnings of
society. Is there any way that doesn't end up as Animal Farm? It just seems to me that all this stuff just ends up in an Animal Farm situation where it's total, like, they try to get you to do good, and then it becomes tribal, and then it's very utilitarian and ruthless.
Yeah, it's going that way, very, very rapidly, before our very eyes, actually. Yes, and it is. It's just like Animal Farm, which, in addition to 1984, everybody should read Orwell's Animal Farm.
Yeah,
but I don't know how it can be turned around, short of an actual collapse, where everything is, where this totally corrupt system is washed away. But that's going to be so unpleasant and inconvenient.
Right. The good will go with the bad.
Yeah. It's like a tidal wave, tidal wave washes everything away, and then we'll see what arises after the tidal wave. That's the way it's going. And, but there's more. But wait, there's more. We're up number 5. Number 6 I've got here is digital IDs everywhere. And, it's a question of your papers being in order, which was like a became like a fun meme of World War II movies. Your papers, please. But now you've got to have government ID to do anything or go anywhere. And if you don't have it, I mean, you can be taken in for questioning because you're pretty suspicious. So everybody's going to have an ID. And in a digital world, it's only logical that it's a digital ID, especially since everybody's got a cell phone today. And you don't have it, you won't be able to access society's amenities. And you pointed out earlier the 15-minute cities that are developing, starting with Oxford, a lot of places around the world. So
Yep, that's how they'll know how to find you, who crossed a certain line at a certain time, whether it's a license plate reader that's tracked back to you, which a lot of these things are already in place. But I think the interesting thing about the digital ID,
or
because
your digital phone, I guess,
Right.
can tell where you are within reasonable limits.
That's the step which I don't think we've seen yet, but we will see. I mean, you started to see with the, they had the COVID tracking apps, basically, that they were trying to tell you if you were, in contact with other people, and it would sense your location. But I think that all this digital ID stuff is clearly going so that they want to make sure they know who you are in the physical world and in the virtual world. So even if you're sitting at home, but you're logged into the internet, whatever the websites you go to, the search results you see, all of that is, you are a known factor at every engagement with the external world. So they can then shape that external world or gate off access to that external world from you if they deem it appropriate. So I just imagine a future of these automatic gating mechanisms. So in the 15-minute city example, it's like, there's a concrete barrier comes up, and you can't go through it but it reads your license plate and it lets you through, it drops down and you can go that way through town. You want to go to a certain website or send a certain email to someone or log onto a social media app, it knows who you are, and it's going to make that determination also, whether or not you can go forward. So you won't even have to have police doing it. It'll be done automatically.
Yeah, and your papers, I'm sure, the next step, you're not going to be able to set up just an email account that you can access from a library or something like that. It'll have to be ID'd and authenticated. And,
it'll be connected to biometrics of some kind, whether it's just a facial scan, which a lot of the iPhones already, or all phones, they unlock based upon scanning your face.
Well, and not only that, but there are billions of cameras placed everywhere, and with facial identification and other factors like even your gait and so forth. They know who you are and where you are. And of course, the next step is going to be to chip everybody to make things easier for everybody.
Right.
For everybody. It's convenience. It's going to happen. It's absolutely going to happen.
It does seem that way.
And if you're not chipped, well, then you might be a terrorist, or certainly, it's going to severely ding your. Well, number 8 I've got here is the social credit system, but that ties into this too.
Yeah,
because if you resist any of this, then you're probably a bad actor, or maybe even a terrorist, and you certainly are if you have pro-freedom or pro-liberty or pro-traditional anything views. So the social credit system is coming to the West as well.
Ultimately, and you have to have the digital ID to have the social credit system. So the digital ID comes first, and then you get scored based upon your interaction with the external world, based upon some government agency or whatever. So yeah, it's coming.
And of course, that ties into the last thing, which is that it turns out that the security apparatus of the state, which traditionally has been directed towards foreign enemies and still is. We need foreign enemies. I guess China is going to be the next big enemy after Russia, but it's turning inwards. And well, you mentioned that $2.6 billion budget for lawyers to prosecute, but I've seen or read, and I don't know, I can't give you authentication for this, that they're looking to round up 3,000 more suspects that they haven't so far. They've incarcerated 1,000
Right.
who are held in
They-
horrible
Yeah,
conditions, right?
they filed charges against 1,000. I don't know if only some of them are still incarcerated, but yeah, they filed charges. Yeah.
Yeah, but where did I hear that there are actually 3,000 more that they've identified that they're going to interrogate and perhaps prosecute? Who knows?
That makes a lot more sense. If that makes that price tag, that $2.6 billion, that's, that price, it's 2.6 million essentially for everyone who's been charged so far. That's a lot for the lawyers on the to prosecute. That's not keeping them in jail. That's not paying the FBI's portion of rounding him up or whatever. That's just for the prosecuting attorneys. But if there's a lot more suspects that they plan to go after, then that makes more sense.
And yes, and related to that is, this was about 25 years ago. They created something called fusion centers in the United States. And it turns out there are 79 fusion centers scattered around the country. And what they are is they're actual physical locations with representatives from various government agencies, the FBI and the DEA and Homeland Security, and they're actual offices, fusion centers, where these people are supposed to compare notes on people that they think are suspicious and working together so that they, don't just live in their own little silos. And
as Biden might say, a whole of government approach.
Yeah, it's so they can mount joint strike forces and not go out and shoot each other because the planted agents might be looking for real terrorists and be shot by the other government agency that thinks that the planted agent, it's Keystone Cop stuff. So that's why they started these fusion centers. And, they have to find something to do to justify their existence. Very dangerous. And it's part of this it's part of the security apparatus of the state. But listen, this started back in the 80s with the militarization of police, where it started, and it was a scandal at the time, that a lot of stuff from the military, which was redundant after the Vietnam War totally wound down, a lot of weapons, a lot of Humvees and MRAPs, armored trucks and so forth. I mean, hey, you don't just want to, let's give them to the cops. The cops will need them. So this started in the 80s with surplus equipment. And then it went to preferential hiring of the military to join the police, because the military, of course, pretty good at following orders. And that's what you want your cops to do. And then the next thing, you might have noticed this, the first time I saw this in the media was with that show was actually quite a good show back in the 80s called NYPD Blue.
Yeah.
And they had one of the characters ran a SWAT team. And that was a new thing back then. SWAT teams are new, and they tie in with the other things, the militarization of the police and heavy weapons and so forth. So everybody's got a SWAT team now. Even the little town of Aspen, Colorado, has a SWAT team of about 10 guys.
And
That's
probably an MRAP also. They probably have an MRAP also.
Oh, they probably do. God knows when they might need it for.
Yeah.
I mean, if Hunter Thompson was still alive now, they might have used it on him before.
Yeah. Did you ever read that The Rise of the Warrior Cop? I think it's Radley Balco wrote this book in early 2010s.
Oh no, I've heard of that book, and
it covers this topic really well. Like, it goes through and explains how it all happened and how there was a huge culture shift from, peace officer to law enforcement, and I thought it was really compelling.
Yeah, just like Harvey Silverglate's book, 3 Felonies a Day. It all ties together. you
Yep.
commit 3 felonies a day, and everybody does apparently. You need a warrior cop to round up these people. So anyway, these are the 8. And I'm sure we're missing some here.
Yeah. Well, nothing comes to mind right now, but which one do you think, which one of these most concerns you in for 2023? I know they're all like nightmare scenarios. I get it. But for 2023, because these will impact in different ways at different times, these trends, I think. What most concerns you for the coming year? Which of these?
It's a multi-pronged assault. So, if I'm a peasant, uh, just doing my thing in my house in the country, and the state decides to attack me, what am I going to fear most? Am I going to fear most the B-52s that are drop high altitude saturation bombing on me, or am I going to fear the F-16s that are going to take it from a low level, or will I feel the sniper, the infantry lossing, or maybe I should fear the snipers more. Maybe they're more dangerous, or it's a full spectrum assault is being launched, and the average guy just doesn't realize it. It's like we're fish swimming in polluted water. Don't realize it anymore.
But the one, so at some point though, one of the things that as the stress because of all these things becomes too high, the things that I worry about, because you worry about like a government obviously taking action that really limits your freedom, or your economic livelihood, but I also just worry about the other people around me, as their life gets more and more difficult. We saw, for instance, this big winter storm that went through the U.S. last week, and get a bunch of snow in Buffalo, New York, which is not, which has had a lot of snow in its past, but they get a lot of snow, and then all of a sudden there are all these lootings of all these businesses there. And, it's like, it's just like this society is just hanging together, and with any little excuse, any like that you go to rioting or you go to looting. And so I just wonder at what point are the people going to be the most dangerous things, or other people, or is it going to be the government that's most dangerous to you, do you think, in the coming year?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. Because the police, for all that we're saying about the police being militarized and used as in fact, security cops, security for the state, as opposed to protecting citizens and their property. This could get completely out of control.
Could. And these glimpses we're getting when you ever have a little disaster, and just seeing the way that the general population is responding to it tells you a lot about it. I mean, there were there have been times in the past in the U.S. where there's a natural disaster of some kind. You see the community come together and do good things. And then there are times, and more frequently now, where you have a little bit of problems that go on. And you see people, loot and steal and kill and break things,
Yeah, and you have to be so careful about defending yourself. Sure. Because you could be prosecuted by the state under all kinds of laws if you defend yourself, and you'll be sued by the survivors or by the family of the people that you might kill, and bankrupted,
yep.
So that you have no assets anymore. And of course, with the war against guns, you're really not going to be in a position to defend yourself anyway. So, especially if you're lame or halt or blind. I mean, the nice thing about guns is that, Sam Colt, made an 80-year-old woman the equal of a strong young male.
Yep.
And you take away the gun, I mean, she's completely at his mercy. So,
which is why the state doesn't want us to have guns.
Yeah, I love guns, but they're trying to take them away. I mean, these people that want to do all these things, they constantly get elected and reelected in Congress. mean, these are basically criminals. They really are criminals. But the fact that they're reelected, I mean, all these ballot boxes cannot be stuffed completely every time. The average person elects them for all kinds of really idiotic reasons. So, yeah, maybe we do need a tidal wave at this time.
Giant tsunami. Yep. Okay. Well, it'll be interesting to see the way these things unfold, these trends. It's so funny that all of these things, when we started this podcast a couple of years ago, these things we would talk about and they seemed incredibly fringe. I mean, they really did. 2 years ago, they seemed fringe. And now they're the dominant narrative and people just accept them. Like it's just accepted that CBDCs are here. And they were talked about as like, no, they'll never do that. That's not what they would do. Why would they do that? It will destroy the banking system, they say. But now everyone knows it's coming. It's amazing how it's changed.
Yeah, it really is. But the average person is still oblivious to this type of thing because I'm on a Zoom call for a while every week with a bunch of, it's about 25 kind of, rich urbanites. And occasionally I'll bring these things up. I'm the odd man out in that group, I promise you. But they tolerate me for God knows what reason. And everybody's, even in that group, very sophisticated, very rich, not libertarian, I assure you, at all. And they're completely oblivious to these things or even approving of them as comments to each other on the Zoom call. So I don't know why I expose myself to that. In a way, it's worse than reading the New York Times and the Washington Post or the Atlantic. I mean, it just bums you out when you see that the bad guys are clearly winning.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it here, Doug. We have these 8 trends and we'll be watching them through the years, see where they end up. If you, as a viewer, have any other thoughts, trends we've missed, please add them to the comments and we can put them on.
Shouldn't we say, we don't want to leave people bummed out after talking about these trends. Shouldn't we end on a high note? Isn't that traditional?
Yeah, let's hear it. You got a high note to talk about?
Well, I've said this before. Hey, it's not likely to be as bad as Berlin in 1945, but maybe I should change that. Maybe I should say, it's certainly not going to be as bad as Stalingrad in 1943.
Well, that's inspiring, Doug. I feel good now. I feel better.
I always look at the bright side whenever possible.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Doug. Appreciate it.